I remember the exact day when I decided I had to learn English. It was a defining moment in my life, one that left a deep mark on me. I had applied for a job that I really wanted, one that promised better pay, better opportunities, and the chance to F. The interview started off well. The interviewers greeted me warmly, and I introduced myself in my native language, feeling confident. But then, one of them asked me a simple question in English. Can you tell us about your previous experience? My confidence vanished. My heart raced. I knew what they were asking. I could understand bits and pieces of English, but forming a reply was a different story. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. After a painfully long silence, I stammered, I work. Job. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. The interviewers tried to be patient, but I could s. When I walked out of that room, I felt crushed. I wasn't just embarrassed, I felt unworthy, like I didn't belong in a world where English seemed to be the key to everything. That night, I sat in my room replaying the interview over and over in my mind. I told myself, this is it. I can't live like this anymore. I need to change. But deciding to learn English and actually doing it. When I first decided to learn English, I didn't realize just how overwhelming the journey would be. The idea seemed simple enough. Learn a new language, open doors to new opportunities, and prove to myself that I was capable of achieving something big. But as soon as I started, it became clear that I had no clue what I was doing. The very first step I took was heading to a local bookstore. I remember walking through the aisles, feeling both excited and intimidated. Shelves upon shelves of English grammar books, vocabulary guides, and textbooks loomed over me. Most of them looked dense, filled with tiny text and charts that made my head spin just by glancing at them. I picked up a thick grammar book titled Mastering English in 30 Days. 30 days? That sounded doable. I bought it thinking, this book will be my guide. I'll follow it page by page and be fluent in no time. That optimism lasted exactly 2 days. I brought the book home and dived straight into it, pen and notebook in hand. The first chapter was about verb conjugations. Present simple, present continuous, present perfect. I underlined every example, highlighting terms I didn't understand. I made flashcards for each verb form and tried to memorize the rules. By the end of the first night, my notebook was full of neatly written notes, and I felt a tiny spark of hope. But the next day, when I tried to use what I'd learned, it was like my brain had erased everything. I sat there, staring at my notebook, struggling to remember even the most basic conjugations. I goes to. No, wait, I go to. Or is it I am go to? Nothing sounded right. Frustration bubbled up inside me, but I pushed it down and convinced myself to keep going. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into studying. I made a strict schedule, 1 hour of grammar in the morning, vocabulary flashcards during lunch breaks, and another hour of reading practice at night. My desk was covered in sticky notes with English words scribbled on them. I even taped a chart of irregular verbs to the wall above my bed, hoping I'd absorb them in my sleep. But no matter how hard I tried, the language felt like an uncrackable code. I'd spend hours memorizing a list of words, only to forget them the next day. When I tried to form sentences, everything came out wrong. I'd mix up verb tenses, use the wrong prepositions, or forget words altogether. It felt like I was trying to build a house without knowing how to use the tools. One particularly humiliating moment stands out in my memory. A tourist stopped me on the street one afternoon and asked, "Excuse me, do you know where the train station is?" I understood the question, barely, but my mind went completely blank. I wanted to say, "Go straight and turn left," but the words wouldn't come. All I managed to mumble was, straight. Left?" The tourist looked confused and walked away, probably wondering why I sounded so unsure. I felt humiliated. I'd been studying English for weeks, yet I couldn't even answer a simple question. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my grammar book with a sinking feeling in my chest. For the first time, I thought about giving up. Maybe I'm just not good at languages, I thought. Maybe some people are naturally gifted, and I'm not one of them. But another part of me refused to quit. I reminded myself why I had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about learning a new skill, it was about changing my life. I wanted better job opportunities, the confidence to travel, and the ability to communicate with people from all over the world. I couldn't let one bad day, or even several bad days, stop me. So I kept going. One of the biggest challenges I faced during this time was dealing with the overwhelming amount of information. Every resource I found seemed to contradict the others. One book would say, "Focus on grammar first." Another would claim, "Grammar doesn't matter, just learn vocabulary." Online forums were filled with debates about the best methods for learning English. Should I listen to podcasts? Watch movies? Take formal classes? I tried to do everything at once, and it was a disaster. I'd spend hours on one method, only to abandon it for another the next day. I started watching YouTube videos of language learners sharing their tips. One person swore by writing essays every day, so I tried that. Another recommended listening to audiobooks while sleeping, so I downloaded a bunch of English audiobooks and played them on repeat at night. Spoiler, I didn't wake up fluent. Looking back, I realized that my biggest mistake during this phase was trying to rush the process. I wanted instant results. I wanted to wake up one day and find that English had suddenly clicked in my brain. But language learning doesn't work that way. One particularly low point came when I tried to write a diary entry in English. I thought it would be a simple exercise, just write about my day. But as soon as I started, I hit a wall. I didn't know how to say half the things I wanted to say. I spent more time flipping through a dictionary than actually writing. When I finally finished, I reread what I'd written and felt embarrassed by how childish it sounded. Today I go to market. Buy apple and bread. Very good day. I wanted to cry. Is this what months of studying have led to? I thought. I sound like a 5-year-old. But then, something strange happened. As I sat there wallowing in self-doubt, I noticed something. I had written a complete sentence. Sure, it was simple and full of mistakes, but it was still a sentence. A few months ago, I wouldn't have been able to write even that much. That realization gave me a tiny glimmer of hope. It reminded me that progress, no matter how small, is still progress. From that point on, I started to change my mindset. Instead of focusing on what I couldn't do, I tried to celebrate the little victories. When I learned a new word and remembered it the next day, I'd pat myself on the back. When I successfully understood a phrase in a movie without subtitles, I'd smile to myself. These small wins became my motivation to keep going. Around this time, I came across a video on YouTube completely by chance. I wasn't even searching for anything specific. I was just scrolling aimlessly, feeling defeated after another failed attempt to understand a confusing grammar rule. The thumbnail caught my attention, a young man smiling confidently, with a title that read, "How I Learned English Without Studying Grammar." I clicked on it skeptically, expecting it to be another gimmick or quick-fix solution. But as the man started speaking, something about his story resonated deeply with me. He spoke about his own struggles, how he had once felt lost and frustrated, just like I did. But what struck me most was his advice. He said something so simple yet profound: you don't learn a language by memorizing it. You learn it by living it. Those words stuck with me long after the video ended. I sat there, replaying the phrase in my mind over and over. Living it? I thought. What does that even mean? Up until that moment, I had been treating English like a school subject. I memorized vocabulary lists, studied grammar charts, and took meticulous notes, just like I had done in school. But something clicked when I heard his words. Language wasn't meant to be studied in isolation. It was meant to be experienced, to be a part of your daily life. That realization sparked a new determination in me. From that day forward, I decided to take a completely different approach. The first thing I did was create what I called an English zone in my life. I started small, making subtle but impactful changes to immerse myself in the language as much as possible. The easiest change was switching the language on my phone to English. It seemed like such a minor adjustment at first, but it quickly became a challenge. Suddenly, I had to navigate through unfamiliar words and phrases just to complete basic tasks. Opening my settings, responding to notifications, or even using apps became an exercise in problem solving. I remember staring at the word notifications for a solid minute before realizing what it meant. It was frustrating at first, but slowly, my brain started to adjust. I took things a step further by labeling objects around my house with sticky notes. The fridge had a bright yellow note that said fridge. The mirror in my room said mirror. My door had a note that read door, and even my light switch had a small label on it. At first, it felt a little silly. My friends who visited couldn't stop laughing when they saw my house covered in sticky notes. But I didn't care. Every time I looked at an object, I was reinforcing its name in English. The repetition worked wonders. Next, I started replacing my daily habits with English-focused alternatives. Instead of scrolling through social media in my native language, I began following English-speaking accounts. My Instagram feed became filled with motivational quotes, travel photos, and cooking tutorials, all in English. It was difficult at first because I didn't understand everything, but I found joy in figuring out the meaning of unfamiliar words. Music also became a key part of my new routine. I started listening to English songs, even though I could barely understand the lyrics at first. My playlist was filled with artists like Adele, Ed Sheeran, and Coldplay. I'd play the same song on repeat, looking up the lyrics and singing along until I could match the words perfectly. One of the first songs I mastered was Adele's "Someone Like You." I still remember the day I sang along to the entire song without needing to look at the lyrics. It felt like a personal victory, like I had unlocked a new level in my learning journey. Watching TV shows in English was another game changer. At first, I relied heavily on subtitles in my native language. But as I gained more confidence, I switched to English subtitles, and eventually, I turned them off altogether. I started with light-hearted comedies like Friends. The jokes were difficult to catch at first, but I loved the characters and their quirky interactions. I still remember the first time I understood an entire scene without needing subtitles. It was a moment of pure triumph. But it wasn't just about consuming English passively. I knew I needed to actively use the language if I wanted to improve. One day, I decided to start a diary in English. It was a daunting idea because I had no idea how to express my thoughts without making countless mistakes. But I pushed through the fear and wrote my first entry. It was a simple paragraph about my day. Today, I go to market. I buy apple and bread. It is good. Reading it back, I couldn't help but laugh at how basic it sounded. My grammar was all over the place, and my vocabulary was painfully limited. But instead of feeling discouraged, I felt proud. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Over time, my diary entries became more detailed. I learned to describe my feelings, talk about my dreams, and even reflect on my struggles. Writing became a way for me to process my thoughts and measure my progress. Every entry was a small step forward, a reminder that I was improving little by little. Another breakthrough came when I started talking to myself in English. It felt strange at first, almost like I was going crazy. But I realized that speaking out loud helped me practice forming sentences without the pressure of being judged. I'd narrate my actions as I went about my day, saying things like, "I am washing the dishes," or "I need to go to the store later." Over time, it became second nature. These small, consistent changes started to add up. English was no longer just a subject I studied. It became a part of my daily life. I was living the language, just like the young man in the video had suggested. And for the first time since I started this journey, I felt like I was making real progress. Looking back, that video was the turning point. It taught me that learning a language isn't about perfection or memorization. It's about immersing yourself in the experience and embracing the process. Those sticky notes, those awkward conversations with myself, and those off-key renditions of Adele songs were all stepping stones on my path to fluency. I also discovered the joy of learning through the things I genuinely loved. It wasn't just about textbooks and grammar anymore. This was about immersing myself in a world of language that felt vibrant, alive, and fun. It all started with music. I've always loved music, but up until then, I'd only ever listened to songs in my native language. One day, I stumbled across Adele's "Someone Like You." Even though I barely understood the lyrics, her voice captivated me. There was so much emotion in her singing, sadness, longing, hope, that I felt connected to the song, even without knowing all the words. At first, I simply listened, letting the melody wash over me. But soon, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to look up the lyrics. That's when the real magic began. I played the song on repeat, pausing after every line to understand the meaning. With a dictionary in hand, I broke down each phrase, from "never mind, I'll find someone like you to I wish nothing but the best for you too." The song became a puzzle, and every word I learned was like finding a missing piece. Singing along was a whole new challenge. My tongue stumbled over the words, and my pronunciation was far from perfect. But I didn't care. I'd close my door, put on my headphones, and belt out the lyrics as if I were performing on stage. I must have sounded ridiculous, off-key and slightly out of breath, but I didn't mind. For the first time, learning English felt joyful, almost effortless. After mastering Someone Like You, I moved on to other songs. Ed Sheeran's Perfect, Coldplay's Fix You, and even Taylor Swift's Love Story became part of my growing playlist. Each song was a tiny English lesson disguised as entertainment. Singing along helped me improve my pronunciation, expand my vocabulary, and, most importantly, build my confidence. But music was just the beginning. My next big discovery was TV shows, and my first love was Friends. I'd heard people rave about it for years, so I decided to give it a try. At first, I watched with subtitles in my native language. I laughed at the jokes, enjoyed the characters' antics, and slowly started picking up common phrases. But after a few episodes, I challenged myself to switch to English subtitles. It wasn't easy. The characters spoke so fast, and their humor often relied on wordplay that went completely over my head. Still, I persisted. I paused frequently, rewound scenes, and even wrote down phrases I found interesting. Eventually, I got bold enough to watch without any subtitles at all. The first episode one watched this way felt like running a marathon. I missed half of what they were saying and had to rely on body language and context to fill in the gaps. But the sense of accomplishment I felt afterward was worth every moment of struggle. One of my favorite characters was Chandler Bing. His sarcastic one-liners and awkward jokes always made me laugh, even when I didn't fully understand them. One day, I decided to imitate his way of speaking. I practiced saying, "Could I be any more sarcastic?" in front of the mirror, mimicking his tone and delivery. It was silly, but it made me feel like I was part of the show, like I was one of the gang hanging out at Central Perk. Of course, my journey wasn't without its embarrassing moments. One of the funniest, and most mortifying, experiences happened during a conversation with a friend. We were talking about hobbies, and I wanted to say, "I love cooking." But in my nervousness, I mispronounced the word cooking in a way that sounded like, well, let's just say it rhymed with a certain inappropriate word. My friend burst out laughing, and I was horrified. My face turned bright red as I realized what I'd said. I quickly tried to correct myself, stammering, No, I mean cooking. Like making food." Even though I wanted to crawl under a rock and disappear, that moment turned out to be a valuable lesson. It taught me the importance of pronunciation and how small changes in sound could completely alter the meaning of a word. From then on, I became obsessed with getting my pronunciation right. I spent hours practicing tricky sounds, listening to native speakers, and repeating words until they felt natural. But more importantly, that moment taught me not to take myself too seriously. Mistakes were going to happen. It was inevitable. Instead of letting them discourage me, I learned to laugh at them and use them as opportunities to grow. Those early days of learning through music and TV were some of the most transformative moments in my journey. They showed me that language isn't just about rules and structure. It's about expression, connection, and having fun. Whether I was singing along to Adele, laughing at Chandler's jokes, or stumbling over my own words, I was learning. And for the first time, I felt like English was becoming a part of me. Not just something I studied, but something I lived. Speaking was, by far, the hardest part of learning English for me. I could listen and understand simple sentences, and I was getting better at writing with short paragraphs or diary entries. But whenever I tried to speak, it felt like my tongue was tied in knots. The words were in my head, but somehow, they got lost between my brain and my mouth. Even when I practiced alone, I felt awkward. My pronunciation was clumsy, my sentences were full of pauses, and I often found myself second-guessing every word. Still, I knew that if I wanted to truly master English, I had to face my fear and speak. To ease into it, I started talking to myself in English. It felt strange, almost silly, but it was a safe space where I could practice without fear of judgment. I'd narrate my actions as I went about my day. I am making coffee. The coffee is hot. I will drink it now, I'd say, pretending I was a commentator describing my own life. Sometimes, I'd stand in front of a mirror and practice conversations with myself. Hello, how are you? I'd ask, then answer, I'm fine, thank you. And you? It was basic and repetitive, but it helped me build confidence. I started experimenting with new phrases and expressions, even if they didn't always make sense. Over time, speaking to myself became less awkward and more natural. But I knew I couldn't stay in my comfort zone forever. I needed to speak with real people if I wanted to improve. That's when I discovered a language exchange app. It was a platform where people from around the world could practice speaking with native or fluent speakers. I created a profile, nervously typing out a short introduction about myself. Hi, I'm your name, and I'm learning English. I'm looking for someone to practice speaking with. Please be patient. I'm a beginner. I hesitated before hitting the submit button, but once I did, there was no turning back. My first conversation on the app was, quite honestly, a disaster. I was matched with a kind woman from Canada who introduced herself cheerfully. Hi, how are you? She asked. I froze. My mind went blank, and all I could manage was a timid, good. She smiled and said, That's okay. Let's try again. How are you? This time, I managed to say, I am fine, thank you. And you? It felt like a monumental effort just to get those words out. The rest of the conversation was equally challenging. I kept apologizing for my mistakes, stumbling over words, and asking her to repeat herself. She had to speak slowly and clearly, often rephrasing her sentences so I could understand. But she was incredibly patient and encouraging. She told me, Don't worry about making mistakes. That's how we learn. By the end of the conversation, I was mentally exhausted but also proud of myself. I had taken the first step, no matter how clumsy it was. Encouraged by that small victory, I started using the app regularly. I spoke with people from different countries, each with their own accents and speaking styles. Some were learners like me, while others were native speakers who volunteered their time to help. Each conversation was a new challenge, but with every mistake, I learned something new. Then came the next big step, joining an English-speaking club in my city. I'd heard about the club through a friend, who assured me it was a welcoming space for learners of all levels. Still, the idea of walking into a room full of fluent speakers terrified me. The night before the meeting, I almost talked myself out of it. What if they laugh at me? I thought. What if I make a fool of myself? But deep down, I knew I had to go. If I didn't, I'd always wonder what I had missed. When I arrived, my hands were trembling, and my heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. I stood outside the door for a few minutes, trying to muster the courage to walk in. Finally, I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was buzzing with conversation. People were laughing, chatting, and exchanging stories in English. I felt completely out of place, like an imposter who didn't belong. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving. But before I could, someone approached me with a warm smile. "Is this your first time here?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome. We're so glad you're here," she said, introducing herself and guiding me to a small group. The group members were incredibly friendly. They introduced themselves one by one, speaking slowly and clearly so I could follow along. When it was my turn to speak, I stumbled through my introduction, but no one laughed or made me feel embarrassed. Instead, they clapped and said, "Great job." As the evening went on, I started to relax. We played games, practiced conversation, and even shared jokes. I made plenty of mistakes, mixing up tenses, mispronouncing words, and occasionally drawing a blank when I didn't know how to respond. But every mistake was met with gentle corrections and encouragement. One of the most memorable moments from that night was when I managed to tell a funny story about my cat in English. It was a simple story about how my cat once got stuck in a drawer, but the group laughed and applauded like I'd just delivered a stand-up comedy routine. That small success gave me a huge confidence boost. Week by week, I kept attending the club meetings. Each time, I felt a little more confident and a little less afraid. I started participating more actively, asking questions, and even helping other beginners who were just as nervous as I had been. Looking back, those early speaking experiences were some of the most challenging yet rewarding parts of my journey. Talking to myself in English, struggling through conversations on the app, and facing my fears at the English-speaking club, all of these steps pushed me out of my comfort zone and helped me grow. Speaking wasn't just about learning the right words or mastering pronunciation. It was about building courage, embracing mistakes, and connecting with others. And with each conversation, I felt like I was unlocking a new piece of the puzzle, bringing me closer to fluency one word at a time. Progress came slowly, so slowly that sometimes it felt like I wasn't making any at all. But then there were moments, small yet significant, that proved otherwise. Each one was like a tiny beacon, reminding me why I started this journey and showing me just how far I had come. I still remember the first time I ordered food at a restaurant while traveling abroad. I was in a little cafe, somewhere unfamiliar, and the menu was entirely in English. My heart pounded as I scanned the words, trying to decipher them quickly so I wouldn't look out of place. I rehearsed the order in my head a dozen times before the waiter came over. When he asked, "What can I get for you?" I hesitated for a brief moment. Then, summoning all my courage, I said, "I'd like a coffee and a sandwich, please." It wasn't perfect. My pronunciation of sandwich was slightly off, and I stumbled a bit on the word coffee. But he understood me. Without missing a beat, he smiled, repeated my order, and walked away. That small interaction felt monumental. I had spoken English in a real-world situation and succeeded. I wanted to jump up and cheer right there in the cafe. Then there was the time I helped a lost tourist in my own town. I was walking to the market when I noticed a woman looking at a map, her face scrunched up in confusion. She looked up at me and asked, "Excuse me, can you help me find the train station?" For a split second, panic set in. My instinct was to apologize and walk away, claiming I didn't understand. But instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I can help. Go straight, then turn left. The station is near the big park." She smiled and thanked me, and as she walked away, I felt a swell of pride. It wasn't just that I had spoken English. It was that I had used it to connect with someone, to offer help when it was needed. These small victories, though seemingly insignificant to others, kept me motivated. Every time I successfully used English, it felt like unlocking a new level in a video game. Each level came with its own challenges, some easy, some frustratingly difficult, but every achievement brought me closer to the ultimate goal. I began to notice progress in unexpected ways. One evening, I was watching a movie in English without subtitles. A daring experiment, considering how dependent I had been on them. Halfway through the film, I realized something amazing. I was understanding the dialogue without having to pause and translate every line in my head. I laughed at a joke and felt an almost childlike joy when I realized I'd gotten it without needing an explanation. Another breakthrough came during a phone call with a customer service representative. My internet had stopped working, and I needed help fixing it. The thought of navigating a technical issue in English over the phone was daunting, but I had no choice. I braced myself and dialed the number. The call lasted about 15 minutes. I stumbled a few times, repeating myself and occasionally asking the representative to slow down. But in the end, we solved the problem. As I hung up, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. I had just handled a complex situation entirely in English, something I couldn't have imagined doing just a year earlier. These moments, these tiny flashes of triumph, were what kept me going. They reminded me that progress wasn't always about grand milestones. Sometimes, it was about the little things. Ordering a meal, helping a stranger, laughing at a joke, or solving a problem. Each one was a reminder that I was capable, that I was learning, that I was growing. And it wasn't just about the language itself, it was about what it represented. With every word I learned, every sentence I spoke, I was building a bridge to a larger world. I was gaining the ability to connect with people from different cultures, to explore new opportunities, and to express myself in ways I never could before. Every success, no matter how small, reinforced one crucial lesson. Learning a language isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to try, to fail, and to try again. It's about celebrating progress, even when it comes in tiny, unassuming steps. And most of all, it's about believing in yourself, even when the journey feels impossibly hard. These small victories were my fuel. They turned fear into confidence, hesitation into determination, and a dream into reality. Step by step, word by word, I was building a new version of myself. One that could thrive in a world far bigger and more exciting than I had ever imagined. The biggest turning point in my journey came when I was asked to give a presentation at work, in English. I still remember the moment my manager called me into her office and explained the assignment. "We've got an important client coming in next month," she said. "You'll be presenting the project update. They're based in the US, so the presentation needs to be in English." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Me? A presentation? In English? I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I wanted to say no, to explain that I wasn't ready, that someone else would be better suited for the task. But then I thought about how far I had come, the late nights spent practicing, the countless mistakes I had learned from, the little victories that had kept me going. If I didn't take this opportunity, would I regret it? With a shaky voice, I said, "Okay, I'll do it." The next few weeks were some of the most intense of my life. I threw myself into preparing for the presentation. I started by writing out my script in English, carefully crafting each sentence to ensure it was clear and professional. Then came the task of memorizing it, not just the words, but the rhythm and flow of how I wanted to deliver it. To build my confidence, I practiced in front of the mirror every evening. At first, it felt awkward. I stumbled over words, mispronounced phrases, and struggled to make eye contact with my reflection. But slowly, I started to improve. I began recording myself on my phone so I could listen to how I sounded. It was painful to hear my mistakes, but it also gave me a chance to correct them. I even rehearsed in front of my family, who patiently sat through my presentation multiple times. They didn't understand much English, but they clapped and cheered every time I finished, giving me the encouragement I desperately needed. To prepare for questions from the audience, I created a list of potential topics they might ask about and practiced my responses. I used the language exchange app to simulate Q&A sessions with native speakers, explaining parts of my project and asking for feedback. Every conversation helped me fine-tune my delivery and build my confidence. As the day of the presentation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. On one hand, I knew I had prepared as much as I could. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the fear of messing up in front of an important audience. When the day finally arrived, my nerves were at an all-time high. As I stood outside the conference room, clutching my notes, I could feel my hands trembling. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and reminded myself of everything I had overcome to get to this point. Walking into the room, I was greeted by a dozen faces. My colleagues, my manager, and the clients. Their presence was intimidating, but I forced myself to smile as I set up my slides. When it was time to begin, I stood at the front of the room, took another deep breath, and started speaking. The first few sentences felt shaky, like my voice didn't quite belong to me. But as I continued, something amazing happened. I realized that I could do it. The words started flowing naturally, just as I had practiced. I glanced around the room and saw the clients nodding along, their expressions attentive and engaged. The more I spoke, the more my confidence grew. I emphasized key points, gestured to the slides, and even made eye contact with the audience. When it came time for the Q&A session, I was ready. The clients asked thoughtful questions, and I answered them to the best of my ability. Some answers weren't perfect, but I stayed calm, rephrasing myself when needed and making sure my message was clear. When I finished, there was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, the room erupted into applause. My manager smiled and gave me a thumbs up, and the clients complimented my presentation, saying it was clear, concise, and well delivered. In that moment, I felt a wave of relief and pride. All the late nights, the mistakes, the awkward conversations, they were all worth it. Standing there, I realized that I had just achieved something I once thought was impossible. The presentation wasn't just a professional milestone, it was proof of how far I had come. It reminded me that learning a language is about perseverance, about pushing through the discomfort and doubt to reach moments of triumph. It showed me that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. That day marked a turning point not only in my English journey but also in my personal growth. It gave me the confidence to tackle new challenges, both in English and in other areas of my life. It was a reminder that fear and self-doubt are temporary, but the rewards of pushing through them can last a lifetime. Today, English is a part of my life. I use it every day at work, when traveling, and even when making new friends from around the world. It's become so integrated into my routine that I no longer think twice about it. Whether I'm collaborating with colleagues across different countries, asking for directions in a foreign city, or simply chatting with someone I've met online, English has become a bridge connecting me to a vast and diverse world. It's opened doors I never thought possible, allowing me to explore opportunities one couldn't have imagined when I first started learning. Looking back, I see that learning English wasn't just about acquiring a new set of vocabulary or mastering grammar rules. It was about proving something far deeper to myself, that I could overcome challenges, that I could grow beyond my self-imposed limitations, and that I was capable of achieving things that once seemed out of reach. The journey wasn't just about the language. It was about building confidence, resilience, and self-belief. It taught me that the only thing standing in my way was fear, and once I pushed past that, I realized I could accomplish anything. And now, when I look back at the person I was when I first began, I'm in awe of how much I've changed. I remember the anxiety of trying to say even the simplest words, the frustration of making mistakes, the doubt that constantly whispered in my ear. But I also remember the small victories. Understanding a song's lyrics for the first time, having my first conversation with a native speaker, giving that terrifying presentation at work and realizing I could do it. Each of these moments, no matter how small they seemed at the time, added up to something far bigger, a transformation of not just my language skills, but my entire outlook on life. To anyone who's just starting their journey, I want to say this: don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't aim for perfection. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn, and every small step forward is progress. Learning a language isn't about being flawless. It's about being brave enough to try, to stumble, to get back up, and to keep going. Take it one step at a time, and celebrate every little victory. Because those moments, no matter how small, are what add up to your success. Because if I, someone who once couldn't even say hello properly, can learn English, then I believe anyone can. It's not just about the language. It's about the belief that you can overcome anything, one word at a time.